There are several problems at Newcastle United right now, and two big factors could play a part in the future, I guess, of the squad, but also Eddie Howe as well. Because, of course, last season was so strong for Newcastle. This season, they currently sit in 10th in the league, and, of course, they want to get and have European football. They're still in the FA Cup, just about, and, of course, that will get them into the Europa League. But if they want to get in 5th spot and get that Champions League spot, then they need things to go for them in terms of Arsenal having a deep run, Man City having a deep run in that competition. And if Newcastle don't win the FA Cup and a team outside the top 6 does win the FA Cup, then it's going to get very, very difficult for Newcastle to get themselves into Europe this season. And the ramifications of that, you would imagine, would be pretty ugly for Eddie Howe, wouldn't you say, Nubaid?
Firstly, I'd say he's unlucky because last season they overachieved massively and he's a sort of victim of his own success. But also, because of the situation they're in now, because they made Champions League last season, because they have financial issues still, and that's why they haven't been spending loads of money, effectively, if they don't make Europe, they have less money to spend. They probably have to sell another big player. And effectively, you're going, okay, so the plan was Newcastle are going to become a Champions League club. We were a Champions League club. Now we're not even a Europa League club. This fella's not cutting it for us. And there are so many managers out there. And that is where I think Eddie Howe's got a problem. There's a lot of options now of other managers that Newcastle will go for that are maybe a little bit more glamorous. But, I mean, you've previously said that like he is the guy for Newcastle.
I have. I think the next 12 games, obviously, either save his job or he will lose it, because the remaining fixtures are quite kind. And I think how you end the season is going to be really, really important, like for any team, but in particular, this Newcastle side who's coming up. They've got Wolves, Chelsea, Crystal Palace, West Ham, Everton, Fulham, Tottenham, Man United, Sheffield United, Burnley, Brighton and Brentford. There's no reason why they can't win all of that. Obviously, that's ridiculous, but they could certainly win. They could go on an 8-game winning run. And I think if they do something like that, you go, look, the fog will clear a little bit and people can go, come on, we've had these injuries. We've had a new step up in terms of the Champions League. We're playing against teams that are now a little bit more careful when they play against us as well. I think there's been some clear problems as well. Defensively, they've been all over the shop. And recent performances, look at the Arsenal game in particular. Terrible. And I know Arsenal were good. I know they were up for it. But Newcastle were awful in that game. And sort of the cornerstone for them has been the defence this year, right?
Yeah, well, before the Blackburn game in the FA Cup, which they squeezed through, in the previous 7 games they conceded 21 goals. That's three goals per game. That's just not good enough for a team like Newcastle, who, like you said, their hallmark was defence. Again, injuries, you can talk about injuries of every team, but they've had some big injuries this season, especially earlier on in the season. It really cost them when they were on a decent run. But this is a Newcastle team that I think gain energy from runs in cup competitions. We saw how energised they were when they were drawn in that Champions League group and they had all those big fixtures, and they're unlucky this season. They've now drawn Man City in the FA Cup. We expect them to probably lose that one. They drew City in the 3rd round of the League Cup, so went out pretty early in that competition as well. And so it's a Newcastle team that I think they're struggling to really understand their identity. Like losing Dan Ashworth is a big deal to Manchester United, who ostensibly last season you'd say were in a worse position than Newcastle. I know that Newcastle overachieved and Manchester United did a decent job, but you thought Newcastle were going like that and Man United were kind of plateauing or maybe dipping. But it's gone the other way this season for Newcastle, and I think that's a massive ego hit, like losing Dan Ashworth to a team like Manchester United, who you're aspiring to get to in terms of size.
The one thing I'd just quickly come back to is the injuries. We've obviously spoken a lot about injuries, but I think one of the most key positions that maybe people don't talk about enough is goalkeepers. Nick Pope picked up an injury against United. They won that game 1-0. Then De Vrij has come in, who hasn't played first team football for a long while, and now they've brought in Karius, who's a 3rd, 4th choice goalkeeper. And not only does that change your style, Nick Pope's a brilliant shot stopper. I think when we looked at the stats last season, Newcastle let teams shoot on goal from range because they've got Pope in goal. Now teams shoot from range, and it's always going in the back of the net. So that's a huge problem for them.
I think it's about being commanding. I think goalkeeping situation is a good point, and the whole team feeling commanding as well. If you think of last season, you sort of had a back 4 of men there, if that makes sense. Like Trippier's been there, done it, and was feeling good. Dan Burn was feeling good. He's been a bit of a scapegoat for them this year, it seems a lot. But even someone like Sven Botman's in poor form right now, and Shah, that will kind of people will sort of gloss over it with the amount of goals that he scores, which is like wild. But if you're not conceding goals, then you're staying in games and giving yourselves a chance. In terms of this squad, taking away the injuries for a second, because I guess as much as you're sort of looking back, you've got to look forward. How good is this squad? Where would you rank this in the Premier League? Have they got a better squad than Man United, like you say?
I did this, and I was going through starting 11s. I was like, would I take Wolves starting 11 over Newcastle's? And I was like, there's a conversation to be had there. If you're doing a combined 11, there's a conversation to be had there.
I think that's through coaching. Yeah, would you have taken Wolves' team over Newcastle at the start of the season, game week 1?
Probably not. But that's a part of Newcastle's issue. This is a team built in the image of Eddie Howe. So if you are to get rid of him, which there's talks about, you are going to have to revamp this whole team because there's a lot of players that they put trust in him in terms of getting the best out of. And they'll have
to sell. I mean, they're going to have to sell regardless, aren't they? It seems like because of... I always get my letters wrong. PSR, is it?
PSR, yeah.
PSR and FFP, which I know some Newcastle fans have been a bit, frustrated with, understandably, when you've got the wealth that they've got, that you might have to sell players like, Bruno Guimaraes and Isak. If you bring in a new manager, the main man that seems to be spoken about in the last few days is Julian Nagelsmann. Do you feel like he's a good shout for Newcastle?
I mean, in terms of character, quite similar to Eddie Howe. I wouldn't say. I mean, he's a little bit more eccentric. In terms of management, completely different. He's so much more forward-thinking. It's going to be high-line defending, and people like Sven Botman and Fabian Schär and Trippier will struggle. Let's just say that, to be on the safe side. And
does that make it a bad idea? Do you because I think the thing that I've said about Newcastle is, yes, they brought in a few good additions, but there's still the drop-off from. And actually, I mean, to be fair, you've got Lewis Miley coming in and some good youngsters there as well. But the overall squad depth has not been fantastic. So whoever's the manager next year, those players need to be involved a little bit, right?
Yeah, but also whoever you bring in either has to match Eddie Howe's profile and style of play. If you go the complete opposite, you're going to have to rip out the whole dressing room. But with Dan Ashworth leaving, they might have to do that anyway, because there'll be players that have been brought in by Dan Ashworth and the Newcastle group, and they've gone, you've put faith in us because we're going to bring in the right sort of players. Some of these guys are going to be going, now, well, we're getting rid of the guy that bought me in, and we're getting rid of the manager that bought me in. Hello, like, I'm done here. So I think the issues now are starting to run very deep and very quick.
But I think there's an issue with Nagelsmann as well, because he's about to manage his home nation in Euros.
Yeah.
So he's going to be preoccupied with that over the summer. And if you're going to bring a manager that has a completely different style of play to the manager that you've already got in, he needs a whole summer without an international tournament to really implement his ideas and bring in his own players. I don't think that would be the right move to make at this time, because he's going to need at least a summer, maybe 2 or 3 transfer windows to get what he needs to get done.
I totally agree. I don't buy it with Nagelsmann. I think whoever it is would need to fit stylistically a little bit, but also have that run up. Otherwise, it just feels a bit silly. And in terms of the Dan Ashworth leaving, he still put the pieces in place. So you're not just going to rip that up. That's just so silly to me. So I think it's a weird time for Eddie Howe, and I guess for the ownership as well. They've been overall very patient and cautious and sensible. It'll be interesting to see if they stick to that. If they don't, will Eddie Howe be the England manager come September?
Ooh.
I like
or
the
broadly,
job.
forget everything I've said. Do you think Eddie Howe will be the manager of England next?
I like the shout.
I don't mind the shout. I think if you're going English, then yeah, but I've just always liked the idea of Jose Mourinho managing England.
Yeah. Me too. Mourinho, it's not a Mourinho video, but Mourinho in international tournaments with a short period of time with a bunch of players, he will cook.
I'm not biting. That's another video. Who do you want to be the England manager? Let us know in the comments below.